Welcome to Practice Diary, and this week I want to do a little introduction to the 1-6-2-5 chord progression. Now, that 1-6-2-5 progression is one of the most popular chord progressions in jazz, but why is it so popular? Why do jazz musicians love it so much? I remember when I was first kind of introduced to the idea of 1-6-2-5, I kind of thought, what's all the fuss about? It's a functional chord progression, but it's not that interesting to listen to. But I think the key to understanding why the 1-6-2-5 chord progression is interesting is because it's the way you use it. It's not the chords themselves necessarily, it's kind of how you apply it, and more importantly, the substitutions that you use. That's why jazz musicians love these 1-6-2-5 progressions, because they can come up with so many different ways to substitute the chords to make it sound more interesting. So anyway, let's just deal with the basic chord progression first. So just say I'm in the key of C, chord 1, C major, chord 6 would normally be A minor 7, but jazz musicians tend to play the 6 as a dominant chord, so they play A7 rather than A minor 7, and chord 2, D minor 7, chord 5, G7. So you've got a major 7 chord on the 1, a dominant 7th chord on the 6th, and then minor 7 on the 2, dominant 7th on the 5, and that's going to be true in whatever key you play in. So that's the basic way to play a 1-6-2-5 chord progression. 1, 6, 2, 5, and then it just goes round and round. It's kind of like a looping chord progression because the 5 leads back to the 1 again. So yeah, what are some simple substitutions we can put on that? So really basic ones. A common thing to do is to substitute in chord 3 for chord 1. In fact, it's barely even a substitution, because if you think about E minor 7, an E minor 7 chord essentially has all the same notes as a C major 9 chord, only without the root note. So if I was to play, say for example, if that's my E minor 7 chord here, and I was to put a C underneath that, then it becomes just a C major 9 chord. E minor 7, C major 9. So that's barely even a substitution, but when you put in that E minor 7 chord instead of the C major chord at the beginning, you get 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. Okay? And then another really simple substitution that you can use on the two dominant 7th chords. So here we've got the A7 and the G7. We can do what I would call a tritone substitution. Now, this is something that jazz musicians absolutely love to do. It's when you take a dominant 7th chord and you replace it with a different dominant 7th chord that has a root note that is a tritone away. A tritone means 3 tones. So, for example, the A7 chord, a note that is 3 tones away from A would be E flat, and so we can change that A7 chord into an E flat 7 chord. Now, the reason why that works is because the E flat 7 chord has the same 3rd and 7th that the A7 chord has. So the A7 has a G as the 7. Now that becomes the 3rd of the E flat chord, and the A flat chord has a C sharp as its 3rd, and that becomes the 7th of the E flat D sharp chord. Okay, so you've got, that's your tritone substitution. So instead of playing E minor A7, you can play E minor E flat 7, and then you can play the chord 2 as normal, D minor 7, and then we can do another tritone substitution on the G7 chord, which is going to take us to a D flat 7 chord. So that would be instead of the G7 chord. So again, same 3rd and 7th, so it works as a substitution. And that takes us back to the 1 chord again. And so if we do that, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1 with the substitutions, you end up with this just descending semitone pattern in the bass. And you get this, this is the chord progression altogether. Now, I'm sure you've all heard stuff like that in jazz tunes before. It's a very jazz sound. But we haven't quite finished there, because there's one more thing that's really important to understand about these 1-6-2-5 progressions in terms of how jazz musicians use them. Because the thing is that if you just say, for example, you have a tune that's maybe not a jazz tune, but you want to adapt it into a jazz style. You want to give it a bit of a jazz makeover, and your tune just goes chord 1, chord 5, chord 1, chord 5. And that's, chord 1 to chord 5 or chord 5 to chord 1, that's a really common, chord movement. That happens in so many tunes. Now, if you have something like that, you could replace it. Instead of playing 1-5, you could play 1-6-2-5. And then you can start to apply some of these alterations. And suddenly, where you had a tune that just sounded like this, 1, 5, 1, 5, then you've got a tune that goes, and it gives it a whole different jazz flavor. It's like you're giving it a jazz chord progression where before it didn't have one. So that's just a bit of an insight into why I think jazz musicians love these 1-6-2-5 progressions. And as I say, there's so many different things you can do this. I'm really just scratching the surface of the very, very basic chord substitutions. And yeah, hopefully I'll get time in the next few weeks to put out another video with some more, I'll put together some examples of some more interesting, some more advanced chord substitutions you can come up with on that 1-6-2-5. And if you can start to throw these into different tunes, even if you just had a tune just say where you were on chord 1 for a really long time. So instead of just playing chord 1 all the time, you could throw in some of these 1-6-2-5 ideas, and it just gives it a whole different flavour. It makes it feel much more like jazz, put some jazz harmony in there. So yeah, that's it. So that's your introduction to 1-6-2-5.